So our next speaker is Wes Heim from the Marine Pollution Studies Lab, another Ember Corps team member.
Hey, hi everybody. Boy, the morning's going really fast. I really enjoyed all the talks that we've had so far. And they've set up my talk really well. So we're gonna be moving out of the sediment in the water column into the biota. So first I want to acknowledge my co-authors from the MPSL laboratory listed here, as well as Ember team members. And I want to specifically thank Autumn Bonema. She's not able to be here today, but she's been such a huge part of getting this work done. So my talk's titled, "A Look at What the Elkhorn Mussels Are Seeing." And what I'm going to be focusing on are caged mussels for this talk. And then Amanda's talk after mine will be looking at biota and will include some resident mussels. So why are we using mussels in this way? So caging mussels and putting them out. So you take mussels from a reference site and you cage them in locations that you're interested in looking at. So this has been a process that's been around for a long time. It's a well-established method. Put the timeline there on the right for you to look at. Mussels are great because they are filtering the seawater continuously and they're accumulating the contaminants over time. So we get an integrated look at what the particulate water column is doing and how that's moving into the biota. The mussels are widely distributed. They're sedentary. They really tolerate pollution pretty well. They bioaccumulate the contaminants that we're talking about today. And they reflect, like I said, an ongoing exposure. So before getting into the study design of the caged animals, I want to talk just a little bit about transplants versus native studies. So I've kind of listed off some benefits and some cons for each of these approaches. They really dovetail nicely together for a project when you use both the native population as well as the caged. So what's nice about the caged is we collect them and we put them out and we know exactly when they went out and when they came back as a cohort. And then we can keep doing that over time. One of the downsides is there can be stress artifacts as we are manipulating these animals and putting them in cages. We have ways to look to see whether that's been the case or not in our data. The great thing about natives, if you're looking at the whole population and that population over a longer period of time versus just these discrete events. So again, they really complement each other nicely. The study that I'm going to be talking about now, we chose Montana de Oro as our reference site to collect these mussels. So it's a site that has been well established through the California Mussel Watch program. I've listed the site number there. There's a historic data set, but not for cobalt, just for nickel. These Mussel Watch programs didn't measure cobalt as part of their program designs. The thing that's interesting about Montana is the natural geology there provides the mussels that are there exposure to both cobalt and nickel. So the concentrations of the mussels from Montana is not zero or non-detect. There's detectable amounts of cobalt and nickel at that site. The sites that we chose in Elkhorn Slough are also long-term sites for Mussel Watch, NOAA Mussel Watch program, and the State Mussel Watch program. One of our sites is at the Elkhorn Slough Highway 1 bridge. And then the other one is at the Salinas River at the Sandholt Bridge. So let's talk about what we did. So we go down to Montana de Oro, we collect about 150 mussels. We want to have kind of pseudo replication. So we take and split those into 15 mussel groups, 3 samples, A, B, and C sample. We immediately freeze one of those samples, that's going to be our reference site. Then we bring the mussels back up here and deploy them at our sites. And then 3 months later, we do the same thing over again. We've done that for a year. So we have this kind of discrete time point, 3-month periods over the year that we can look at. For the lab, we bring the mussels back in, we clean them up. They're pretty foul, get all the dirt, sediment off of them. And then we dissect them, we measure them, we weigh them, and then we digest them for trace metal analysis with nitric acid. And then you heard earlier about ICP-MS. So that's the tool that we're using to actually get the metals concentrations. I'm going to be just focusing on nickel and cobalt today, but we have the full suite of metals that we can dive into. Okay, so to keep it simple and targeted, these are the 4 questions that I'll be providing data to support or not support today. So the first one is, and you heard in previous talks, this idea of this like common source where you have these metals moving in lockstep together, or I think Ivano said they know each other, and or they don't know each other. So what is the case for the muscle tissue? And then how is that tissue changing over time with respect to nickel and cobalt concentration? And then I'll be introducing a term called muscle condition. So how does muscle condition affect what we measure? And then finally, are the levels elevated compared to before the fire? Okay, so a science slide here. And I was again warned to try to keep it a little bit more simple. And so let me walk you through this this slide here. So this is data that's going to address, do those metals know each other in the muscle tissues that we put out? And we see on the x-axis, these are our sites. So we have Highway 1, Sandholt, and then the Montana de Oro site, that reference site that has that geologic source of these metals. And then on the y-axis, you're basically looking at how well they know each other. So a 0 is they don't know each other at all. A 1 is they really know each other. And so what we see is at the Montana site, they weren't statistically correlated. But with the Elkhorn Slough sites, Highway 1 and Sandholt, we see a real strong relationship between these 2 metals. So let's move on to concentrations over time. So again, looking at this slide, I'll walk you through it. We have 2 colors. That's the nickel and cobalt. On the x-axis, we have time. On the y-axis, we have those metals concentration in micrograms per gram dry weight. Dry weight is what we use in mussels so that we get rid of the water. We're just looking at the tissue. And this is an average of both the Sandholt and the Highway 1 sites for each of those data points because they track so well. For simplicity, I'm just merging them here. So we see the June site or the June collection. So that would have been put out in March, and that's our first data time point. And then September, our second time point. After 3 months, we see this slight elevation in the mussels. All right, we add another data point, so same setup, and looks like nickel is continuing just to tick up a little bit where cobalt levels off. Oops, I just blew the surprise there. So this is the fourth data set, the 4th time point, and we see again nickel continuing to go up. Cobalt now is going up as well. So all of a sudden we take our time point, and this data just came in last week. So big change in direction. All of a sudden we thought we were seeing this kind of increase in these cohorts over time, and all of a sudden we're dropping back down to kind of what we were seeing earlier in the year. So that was a big surprise, but was also really interesting. So what's going on here? And so this is where I'm going to introduce the term muscle condition. And the math behind this is just the amount of dry weight tissue for that composite of 15 samples, and then measuring each of the shell lengths and cubing it, and then summing it up, and then just adding a scalar. I added a scalar so that we're just in the 0 to 100 instead of using like decimal points or anything. But the point is, on the x-axis, this unitless term muscle condition, which basically means those are like really healthy muscles, there was like tissue in them, is on the x-axis against the nickel concentration on the y-axis. And we see this linear relationship between muscle condition and the metal concentration. And what we see is that the smaller the number for condition, the higher the metal concentration is. So I'm showing you nickel here. Cobalt for the Highway 1 showed the same relationship, but a little weaker, versus the Sandholt cobalt, which did not have this relationship. So I wanted to go over kind of what this means for what I've already presented. And what we see is these kind of two questions. Does condition explain the correlation, how well those metals know each other in the muscles? And it only explains that partially. So though that relationship between cobalt and nickel holds once you factor out condition. For the time series, condition is explaining nickel. It can explain that whole trend for nickel. For cobalt, it's not as clear cut. So beyond dilution, there's still likely a shared source. The nickel cobalt link survives, just weaker, as I just said. And then we can go back to the reference site, that first chart that I showed, where we don't see that relationship at Montana de Oro that we do in the slough. And so that's another indirect piece that there's this shared source happening in the slough. And the final data I'll present is kind of comparing where we're at now to where we were before the fire. Okay, so to walk you through this slide, what we have is both cobalt and nickel on the x-axis and our site. So Highway 1, cobalt nickel, Sandholt, cobalt nickel. And then we have the concentration on the y-axis. And what we're looking at here is, in the gray bars, is the NOAA program. So I said they didn't analyze for cobalt. So got on the phone, talked to the program manager, and they got us tissue out for before the fire. Unfortunately, they only had this one time point, 2010. There was, it speaks to how hard it is to archive tissue sample. They had a hurricane in North Carolina, lost power, a lot of our pre-fire baseline that we could have used. But we have the one data point for 2010, and we're comparing that against all of the data that we collected last year. And so what we're seeing is for cobalt, we see that the post-fire concentrations were higher for all of the samples. And for nickel, it was a mixed story, that nickel at Sandholt actually was lower than what was before the battery fire. So just to sum it up, what we found, that cobalt and nickel moved together in the slough, but not at our unaffected reference site. The nickel climbed for most of the year, but we can use muscle condition to explain that trend. So how much tissue a muscle is carrying meaningfully shapes what we measure, and that's because it's part of the concentration math, right? You have the amount of metal over the amount of tissue. And then compared to a limited pre-fire baseline, cobalt appears consistently higher. Nickel is more of a mixed picture. I think for lessons learned for me on this is that one new quarter of data was enough to change the story, right? I thought we had this trend going, get another data point and completely changes it. It points to how limited our data set is right now. And it also speaks to how important continuous monitoring is after an event like this. So for acknowledgements, I want to acknowledge this would not have happened without Julie Packard, Nancy Burnett, Louise Stevens, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife all provided funds to get this work done. And then I want to acknowledge the Ember team, and as well as everybody else who's helped on this that isn't explicitly listed here. And then also thank the permit department, because they got our permit so quick for a scientific collection permit. We were able to get out there in March. It was like they really expedited that for us. And then last, I need to acknowledge Claude for helping me put this slideshow together. If you're using AI, you probably recognize the format. And with that, I'm done, and we'll take any questions.
Thank you. And the data that we got from the surface wipes, we found that the numbers were lower there in the sand hole. We had several samples there along the outer barrier, this area where we are now. And it showed, generally speaking, the levels were lower to that area of deposition. And perhaps Professor Weiss can address the wind currents and whether or not, because, you know, it is further forward than Highway 1 in terms of the winds coming off the ocean. So whether or not that had an impact on the deposition at that location versus Highway 1 may be a factor, just based on what we've seen.
Thank you.
Is there a question on Zoom?
Yes, one clarifying question. Asked, can you repeat, did you depurate the mussels before digestion to omit organic sediment pseudofeces in the gut? And if not, how would you expect this to affect patterns?
So before we started the actual analysis, I reached out to NOAA and talked to their program manager, and we treated our mussels exactly how they treated their mussels so that we could compare it to their pre-fire baseline, and they did not depurate, so we did not depurate.
Would you mind stepping on the stage?
Oh, yeah.
Next one, Steve.
Is condition, is what you were alluding to, like reproductive status and whether or not they had developed or non-developed gonads, and that's a seasonal change in condition, which would also be a seasonal change in biomass, which could be an individual per mussel dilution effect because there's more tissue. If those added, gonads don't differentially pick up some of those heavy metals, is that the idea, or is it something totally different?
I mean, you should have given the talk. That's exactly what it is. That's right. I didn't go into it too much, but you can think about that shell sized isn't changing, but what's in it is. And so the condition, and this is operationally defined, and I chose one that is established in peer-reviewed literature. But yes, it's accounting for the size of the organism from the shell length, but also the mass of the tissue that is in it, which does change seasonally.
After a quick question. Let's do actually Amanda on Zoom because there's so many more people on Zoom.
Okay. We have a question. How do nickel and cobalt concentrations compare in the mussel with those in mussels from Montana de Oro?
The Montana de Oro concentrations are similar to what you find in the mussel concentration for the Highway 1 and the samples. Again, there's a lot of variation seasonally with that concentration, but it's the source of natural cobalt and nickel are showing up in the Montana mussels. So there isn't a huge difference between those. It changes over time, where when we put our mussels out, sometimes there was a lot of accumulation happening compared to Montana. So our concentrations were higher for some of the data points than what was at Montana. But then there was also the reverse of that, where sometimes the Montana mussel concentrations were higher than the Elkhorn Slough samples.
Thank you.